Welcome back. Hopefully you had a good break. This is the fourth of a 5-part mini lecture series in Unit 8 when we're talking about infectious disease. Chapter 17 of your text will serve as the baseline for this content, and we're going to talk about zoonotic diseases or zoonoses. Zoonotic diseases by definition are disease that can pass from humans to animals and back. We need to be aware, of course, of these because these are exposure risk for you. And so therefore preventing them in our animals or just simply understanding the risk is quite critical for us. So let's get to the content here. This section will be rather brief, and then we will finish up with the fifth and final section of this mini lecture series. So again, just to give you a brief overview, there's a diagram on the bottom right hand of your screen where a dog would be a potential carrying vector of a pathogen that could infect humans. But again, these diseases can be passed, whether it's direct contact, whether it's another vector like a bird, or simple food contamination. But the type and the frequency of these zoonotic diseases really vary. Sometimes they're extremely infrequent and therefore kind of those freak situations that can happen, but certainly a risk nonetheless that we need to be aware of. All right, first things first, let's talk about bite wounds. Of course, besides being a bit traumatic, they can be serious because of the suturing, the antibiotics, and the hospitalization that can occur. And of course, children being at highest risk because we can spread something like rabies, or there might be some other pathogen being carried by a cat or a dog that might be responsible for that bite wound. And some of the saliva that some of these animals do have, harbors a lot of nasty bacteria and pathogens. So you have to be aware of, what you're dealing with that caused the bite wound. Rabies, of course, is a great example, and we ought to spend a little bit of time on that one in particular because it's a virus that infects the central nervous system, and it really can't be diagnosed in a living animal, so it's quite frightening, of course, for humans if they're at risk for having contracted rabies. So prevention is essential, and that's why we highly recommend rabies vaccinations for your dogs to keep current on their shots. That way there's minimal risk of transmitting that to a human if in fact they did happen to get bit. The vaccine has to be given before the animal is exposed to rabies themselves. And of course, rabies is carried by a number of other animal vectors, raccoons or other rodents and stuff like that. A vaccine is not going to be very helpful if the dog is already carrying rabies. So you have to be aware that you're ahead of the game here. Ringworm is another great example of disease-causing agent to humans, and you see the photo on the bottom right-hand side. And if you've not ever seen ringworm, it's just basically as the name states, it's a circular patch of skin that will dry up, and it's a fungal problem. Of course, the spores then, as that fungus grows, burst and spread through skin-to-skin contact. And so you see these calves that are sticking their heads through the head rail here. They've got those spots all over their neck and head, and then the lesions can be rather small, like say the size of a nickel, all the way to quite large, as you see in some of the pictures here. Your text says that this is not highly contagious. It's not highly contagious to you and I. It's very highly contagious amongst your animals. So can you get it? Yes, humans can get it from cattle or from livestock relatively easily. So, and if you have an outbreak of it in your calves, it's going to spread rather contagiously. So I would somewhat disagree with how the text represents ringworm in this example. So close contact with infected animals, makes you at risk. There are ways to treat this, with your animals. There are a number of different washes and sprays that you can use to try and knock it back once it sets in, with varying degrees of success. There's no vaccines or really anything that does anything for ringworm in that regard in a preventative nature. But if you think you've been exposed, thoroughly wash the contact areas in order to help prevent that from setting in, because that fungal disease has to kind of infiltrate your skin tissue in order to gain a foothold. Listeria is another one, or listeriosis, and the causative agent here is listed with its Latin name. But infected animals that have the listeria pathogen can shed that organism in their milk. So you have to be aware, if you are consuming unpasteurized dairy products, that that's a risk that you have. Pasteurization kills the listeria bug and therefore prevents the likelihood of that happening. But listeriosis is not simply confined to milk, because it's been known to outbreak on other food products that have gone through different food chains at times, and there have been different outbreaks of listeria in humans as related to that. So, but your text kind of tends to position this as related to dairy only, and with regard to milk and soft cheeses, but it can be spread other ways. Manure being applied over your garden is sometimes a risk for that. So again, make sure you wash your garden produce carefully. A few other things, foodborne pathogens like Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter, Cryptosporidia, a lot of these things related to meat product, and so cooking to adequate temperatures will prevent a lot of that. In the big dairy that I worked at, that I referenced maybe in a prior mini lecture, we had Salmonella go through our operation, and so during that time while we were treating that, those of us who were employed there had to be quite careful as we were exposed to that Salmonella pathogen, again, for several days at a time as we were dealing with that breakout. So we had to make sure that we stayed on a high health plane, because that could have been passed to us relatively easily, even though we weren't consuming any meat product from those animals. Just the prevalence of that pathogen in the herd at that time could have transmitted to humans. Salmonella is sometimes carried to livestock operations by birds, and so managing a large starling population or something like that may be defecating on the feed product is a way to help prevent that. And management of that is not particularly easy at times. One that gets some concern, it's quite rare, but it's certainly very, very infectious, is anthrax. Cutaneous form causes of severe sores. Of course, if you inhale it, it causes a really severe respiratory reaction, usually manifesting itself as pneumonia. The intestinal form causes extreme diarrhea and very high fevers. And so you have to be very aware of what can transmit anthrax. And you want to get antibiotic therapy if you detect that quite early. That's pretty rare. A few other ones, West Nile fever was and still is something that you have to be aware of. Of course, carried by mosquitoes, inflames you in the central nervous system. Horses are also kind of an intermediary vector or intermediary animal for West Nile to be carried. So you have to be aware of that one as well. Mad cow disease and scrapie. Both are prion type diseases. I think I mentioned mad cow early on. Typically produces a gradual onset of neurologic symptoms. Mad cow in particular, scrapie as well, but mad cow is very, very slow growing. So you may not even know that it is in your herd if you've got livestock. You may not even know that you've been exposed to it. Again, very, very rare. There's only a small couple documented cases in the United States altogether. There was an outbreak of mad cow disease back in the mid-1990s, I believe, in Europe that was quite problematic with regard to their beef herd. But again, extremely rare for both of those to have any effect on humans at all, but certainly ones that we need to be aware of. So we'll pause with that, take our final break. Before we finish the last section, I look forward to chatting with you on that one.